Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. When we search for the meaning of life, truth, right and wrong, there's basically two main things that you'll come across if you look at history, if you look at philosophy, if you look at the world religions. You have human conjecture, human beings trying to figure it out for themselves, and you have divine revelation. You have the belief that the Creator, the all-knowing, the all-powerful, sent revelation to us and informed us of the meaning of life, of truth, of right and wrong. These are the two main things that you'll come across. Now, me personally, when I was searching for the meaning of life, I said to myself, you know what? Conjecture doesn't hold a lot of weight with me, because human beings were wrong all the time. Philosophies are conflicting. How can a human being really just sit and ponder and figure out how they got here, what happens when they die, and their true purpose in life, just based on their own intellect, right? I was like, no, it makes far more sense that we have a divine creator who's all-knowing, who has the most perfect names and attributes. And if he communicated with us, if he told us our purpose and what happens when we die and how we got here and things of that nature, what's right and wrong, that's the way to go, obviously. So I put all the philosophy, the human conjecture to the side, and I started looking at different religions that claim to have divine origins, that claim that God, the Creator, revealed scriptures to them, communicated with prophets. But as I was studying this, I realized that these scriptures haven't been preserved. We don't know who actually authored these books. I mean, the stories, there could be truth to them, there could be falsehood. We even know that if you look at the scriptures over time, things have been added and changed and manipulated, right? And this is the case for everything except for Islam. Islam is the one religion that claims to be divine, that has divine origins, and you can back it up with its preservation. Not to mention just the fact that, I mean, you can just read it and understand it and see, if Allah guides you, that this isn't, a human being couldn't have come up with this. So Islam is extremely special and unique in that regard. It's been preserved. This is revelation from Lord of the worlds, from the Creator, the all-knowing. This is from Him. This is Him telling us how we need to live our life, what's right, what's wrong, what happens when we die. And He preserved it for us. It's not like these other religions that haven't been preserved. And if you look at the preservation of Islam, of the Quran, of the Sunnah, there's nothing like it. There's nothing else in the entire world that has the sort of preservation, the type of science that this religion has. And this is, of course, a huge blessing from Allah upon us, because He knew that the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad, he would be the last prophet. The Quran is the last scripture, that this is the guidance from their time until the Day of Judgment. So He preserved it for us. So what's unique about it? It's been preserved, and we need to go back to it so that we can understand the reality of life. Now, what happens over time? Sometimes people, they begin to prefer their intellect over the revelation. This is something that happened to past nations, and this is something that we've seen Muslims, unfortunately, fall victim to in the past and in the present. Instead of going back and saying, okay, what does Allah tell us? What does the Messenger say, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What do the companions, how did they understand this? What did they teach? How did they practice the deen? Over time, people, they start to prefer their intellect over the revelation and start to think, well, you know what? That doesn't make sense to my intellect. Therefore, I'm going to bring forth something new, something that the Prophet and his companions, they never brought forth. And this is when things start getting problematic. And we see a lot of this today. We see a lot of new ways of interpreting the Quran and the Sunnah and Islam that never came before from the origins of our deen that Allah preserved for us. It's new. And this is very problematic. This is how you go astray. Now, who is the best of this ummah after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Abu Bakr. May Allah be pleased with him. Did Abu Bakr, did he prefer his intellect over the revelation? Well, there's the famous story when the Prophet Muhammad made the Isra wal Mi'raj. He made the night journey from Mecca to Bayt al-Maqdis in Jerusalem, and he ascended to the heavens. And the next day, when word got to the kuffar, the disbelievers, what did they do? They ran to Abu Bakr and they said, you know what Muhammad is saying? He's saying that last night he traveled all the way from Mecca all the way to Jerusalem. What do you have to say about this? What was Abu Bakr's response? He said, if the Prophet ﷺ said this, then it's true. Why? Because he preferred revelation over his own intellect. And the funny thing is, if you look further into what Abu Bakr said, it actually doesn't even conflict with your intellect, because he said, I believe something far greater than him traveling from Mecca to Jerusalem in a night. I believe he gets revelation from the Lord of the worlds. So if you think about it, it doesn't even really conflict with your intellect if Allah blessed you with true intellect. It makes sense that you would prefer revelation from Allah over your own human flawed conjecture. And this is why Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he was a Siddiq. He was the best of this ummah after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And furthermore, Ali radiallahu anhu, another great companion from the greatest of this ummah, he famously said that if this deen was from our own opinion and conjecture, we would wipe over the bottom of our socks instead of the top. However, we saw the Prophet ﷺ wiping over the top, so we follow him. This was the understanding of the companions, the greatest generation. They did not prefer their intellect over the revelation. And in fact, as I said, that's true intellect in and of itself, to prefer revelation over your own conjecture. So over time, what we've seen is, if you think of as-sirat al-mustaqim, if you think of the straight path that the Prophet ﷺ was on and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them, it's a straight path from their time until the day of judgment. It's a straight path. And over time, groups have come forth and they've innovated. They brought forth new things, new understandings, new principles that weren't from the Quran and Sunnah and the companions. So if you think about this, think about a straight path. Over time, you had people come and, for example, make an exit, okay? They say, okay, you know what? Everyone should turn left here because we thought about it and we came to the conclusion that when it comes to this principle, when it comes to, for example, Allah's attributes, that we should actually deny them. And they start calling to a different path. Okay, let's say a couple miles further, there's another exit that somebody brought forth. And they said, you know what? We thought about it. And when it comes to Allah's qadr, we deny it because our intellect. So you guys should come this way. So what did the scholars of Ahl Sunnah do? What did they do? They're calling, of course, to as-sirat al-mustaqim, to the straight path. So what they do, when they start explaining directions, for example, the directions on how to remain on the straight path, they will warn from those exits. They will put up roadblocks and say, look, when you're traveling on the straight path, you might come across groups saying this about Allah's attributes, or saying this about Allah's qadr, or saying this about iman. They're wrong. They've deviated. They are calling to misguidance, and they put up roadblocks. That doesn't mean that they're bringing something new. That doesn't mean that they are trying to develop a new science due to their intellect. This doesn't mean that Allah didn't preserve the Quran and Sunnah. But on the contrary, Allah has preserved it. And this is a means of preservation. That when scholars bring up these deviations, they're not bringing forth something new. They are warning you from going astray. They're warning you from these groups that are bringing forth something new. So nowadays, it's a shame that we have people who are preferring their intellect over the revelation. And not only that, but they are acting as if those scholars who have always called people to the straight path. That they're trying to make it seem as if there was a fork in the road. As if there was a fork in the road, and we don't know. We don't know the straight path anymore. Maybe it's to the left, maybe it's to the right. And unfortunately, some people are fooled by this. They think, oh, okay, well, I can go left, I can go right. What's the difference? There's a fork in the road. The straight path hasn't been preserved. However, this is a false understanding. Allah preserved the Quran and the Sunnah, and the straight path, it's clear. And these deviations, these deviant groups that came forth, it's clear how they deviated. If you look into it, if you study it. So basically, what we need to beware of is that when people start preferring their intellect over revelation, it's very dangerous. And there are clear signs when you see people doing this. When you see famous du'at, for example, and they give so much credit to non-Muslim scholars, for example, to philosophy, to non-Muslim institutions, and they belittle the preservation of Islam, of the proper understanding, the aqeedah, the belief of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah that has been preserved. You should have some warning. There are warning signs. I mean, I've heard in the past, now that, alhamdulillah, I've studied the deen, when I go back and I watch certain du'at that I listen to as a new Muslim, I mean, I would hear a tafsir, for example. There's a da'i teaching tafsir, and the entire tafsir is just him talking about philosophy, talking about sports, just rambling. People who use symbolism and all of this sort of like abstract interpretations that aren't from the Quran and Sunnah and companions. I mean, this is something to beware of. There are people actually, just recently, just now, they are teaching philosophy books in their Islamic institutions. They have interviews where you can see how much they love philosophy and philosophers. This is something to beware of, because unfortunately some people, they are afflicted with a love for philosophy, for human intellect, and they begin preferring that over the revelation. This is not from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the last thing I want to mention is, I think, a very good example of somebody who refutes philosophy and talks about it and teaches it, but they do it in a way that shows the superiority of Islam, is Daniel Haqiqatjou. I think if you look at Ilmstitute, if you take classes with him, and if you read his posts, his articles, you know, as far as I have seen, he does a great job of showing how Islam is so far superior. And you will find that many people, unfortunately, they don't, when they talk about philosophy, when they talk about Western institutions and scholarship and so-called Western intellectuals and non-Muslim so-called intellectuals, they don't come across the same way Daniel does, but rather they give so much credit and love and support to philosophy and to these Western intellectual ideas, and they actually even start judging the deen based on their morals and their philosophies. But if you look at the way Daniel teaches, it's as if it's you know, he gets blowback from certain people because the day that we're living in, the age that we're living in, so many people have strayed from preferring revelation over modern philosophy that he comes across as extreme to people. So, you know, we live in a time where he says something like Sharia, the law of Allah, it is superior over man-made laws, and anything that conflicts with the Sharia is misguidance. I mean, subhanAllah, we live in a time where you even have so-called Muslims going against that, preaching against the Sharia. That's the time that we live in. Why do they do that? They do that because they are preferring intellect, and they have this inferiority complex or these desires or whatever. Allah knows best, but they do not prefer revelation over human conjecture in this day and age, clearly. Whereas Daniel Haqiqatjou, he is you can, from what I've seen from his work, and I just use him as an example, if you want to go see what it looks like for somebody who has studied philosophy and the way that Muslims should view it is, you know, for lack of a better example, it's like Islam is a gold brick and philosophy is a pile of feces. And it's like, the vibe I get from Daniel is he's like, you guys are seriously preferring this feces over this gold brick? I mean, that's how in your face and unapologetic he is about it. And I mean, that's the reality. How are you going to prefer that which is worse over that which is better? Are you going to prefer the philosophy and the conjecture of disbelievers over the guidance of the Lord of the worlds, the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions? May Allah be pleased with them. So, you know, that does it for this rant. I hope you found it to be beneficial. It's just something I wanted to point out. This deen has been preserved, okay? And true knowledge is going back to the revelation. So when you hear people doubting that it's been preserved, they're calling to misguidance. And when you find people preferring their intellect, especially when it goes against the Quran and Sunnah, this is clear misguidance. So may Allah protect us, may Allah guide all of us and keep us firm on the truth. Jazakumullahu khairan wa salamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.